Welcome to the Three Eyes podcast with your host, Megan Sweet, applying the three Eyes, intellect, insight, and intuition to promote personal and school-wide transformation. Dedicated to educators, on this podcast, we discuss how learning to see with our three eyes leads to greater self-love and appreciation and unlocks the doors to deeper and more lasting educational improvements for our students. To learn more about us, our events, and to access free content, visit our website at www.your3eyes.com. That's Y-O-U-R, the number 3, EYES.com. Welcome, everybody, to our podcast today. As you know, I'm on a mission to bring more love and compassion into the world and into our education settings in particular. On this podcast, we'll be talking about ways that we can learn to see with our three eyes: intellect, insight, and intuition, and how to integrate the insights we gain from all three lenses to live more balanced, empowered, and fulfilling lives. This is what I call doing the self-work. We'll also be discussing why coming to love and accept oneself is the first step to creating the educational settings that will allow our students to thrive. This means that sometimes we'll be discussing the technical aspects of creating educational change, and other times we'll be talking to people who are embodying the work. This is what I call doing the schoolwork. Today, we're talking about self-work. Our guest, Chris Borland, will be talking with us about why he decided to leave his career as a football player for the San Francisco 49ers and what his work is now. Chris Borland is a former American football linebacker who played for the San Francisco 49ers. He played college football at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and was drafted by the 49ers in the third round of the 2014 NFL Draft. Chris is one of the first NFL players to retire from professional football early in his career due to concerns over head injuries inherent to the sport. Since leaving the NFL, Chris has worked at the Carter Center, which was founded in 1982 by former President Jimmy Carter and his wife Rosalind in partnership with Emory University. The Carter Center was created to advance peace and health worldwide and is guided by a fundamental commitment to human rights and the alleviation of human suffering. Chris is also completing training to teach mindfulness to leaders through the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute. Search Inside Yourself began at Google in 2007 when a team of leading experts in mindfulness, neuroscience, and emotional intelligence developed an internal course for fellow Googlers. It quickly became an incredibly popular training with Google and has since become a nonprofit dedicated to providing mindfulness training worldwide. Chris, thank you for coming and joining us today. You have quite an interesting resume and story to tell. So I thought I'd just open up to you telling us a little bit about yourself, what inspires you today, and then also a little bit about your current journey.
Well, it's a pleasure to be on, Megan. If you'd have told me 5 years ago, and I can't believe it's been 5 years since I was drafted, that I'd be doing emotional intelligence and mindfulness work, I would have thought you were crazy. But I'm really glad that I am. I've had a really circuitous journey. So, entering the NFL, I'd planned to play for as long as I could. My goal was, over a decade to play until the wheels fall off, as players like to say. But as I started my career, I began to look into the ramifications of repetitive brain injury. And I was privy to some of what was being reported, but just superficially. And as I delved deeper and went beneath the headlines, I realized that there's this whole middle ground of players. We hear the dramatic stories, kind of the Aaron Hernandez or Junior Seau, household names that take their lives and upon autopsy have bad brain damage. But what I found was there was a lot of statistics about guys who didn't play for that long, who didn't have significant injury during their career, who had symptoms and who even developed brain diseases. And at that point, I'd played both ways, meaning playing offense and defense in high school. Was a 4-year starter at Wisconsin at middle linebacker and started for the 49ers my rookie year. So I had a lot of football in a brief period of time. I personally knew a few players, who had this brain disease called CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And I'd hit my head more than they did. I'd played against these guys. I watched their film. I had more injury than they did and wasn't overtly symptomatic. When I walked away, I have some acute symptoms, but just wanted to be proactive. I was one of the first guys to publicly, at least explicitly, say that was the reason for walking away. And I think at the time, in 2015, when I quit, was naive to just how contentious the milieu I was stepping into was. The NFL is a $15 billion a year industry. on the books. There's a lot of money made gambling and all the complications that go with that. But the fight for that plays out with science. It plays out with the Department of Defense that's funded a lot of brain injury research. And, I thought those folks that were doing the research were doing so in good faith, and that's not always the case. So I turned to people. I was getting asked to be a part of studies, to recruit other players to studies. And that was my entree into mindfulness, actually. It was very stressful. I turned to my brother-in-law gave me Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, and I read it, loved it intellectually, tried to practice Zazen, and those that know Zen understand how strict it is with posture. Amazingly stuck with it. I don't know how I got through the first, week of awkward, painful sitting, but felt something in it and appreciated it. It helped me with that stress of finding something that would help former players, of dealing with kind of the firestorm in the media and elsewhere. And that's when the light bulb went off that this could be something to help players. I knew Richie Davidson from Wisconsin. For your listeners that may not know, Richie's kind of one of the pioneers with the neuroscience of mindfulness. And I reached out to him to run a study with former NFL players, and we did it. We got 17 former players to go through an 8-week program in mindfulness based loosely off MBSR. And it was a resounding success, a first of its kind study that we're continuing to try to replicate in active and in former athlete populations. So throughout the course of connecting with Richie, finding the practice on my own, it's only grown. And for a while, felt like I had a foot in two disparate worlds. But folks would be surprised at just how similar the contemplative world is to high performance athletics.
Yeah, no, I think it makes, there's so much I want to ask you about, but it makes a lot of sense actually, because athletes have to learn how to drive their attention and to focus really well. And I imagine mindfulness in that way is almost a very similar parallel, in that you have to learn to shut everything else out, to focus in on the task at hand. In a lot of ways, mindfulness is almost the same thing, where you clear your mind and you get a little bit more centered. So in that way, I get it. But I also imagine with athletes, there's just a lot of, I was going to say ego. That's not quite the right word, but like, the physicality of it. I wonder if mindfulness can feel like it's not quite connected with the physicality that folks experience. So you're a bridge, and you're helping folks to see what the connection is. Before we get in, I want to ask a bunch about actually the research and what you found and how the players have responded to it. But I want to put this kind of first pin in there around this idea of learning to listen to your intuition, or learning to take the path unexpected. So we started the call with you saying that you didn't think that you'd be on a podcast talking about mindfulness 5 years ago. And that's a really significant thing, because you built your career and your life towards being in the NFL, and to make such a big shift is pretty profound. And so I guess I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you started learning about the brain injuries and what happened internally. What were the decisions that happened for you? How did you come to the decision to step away from doing football? Because in Michelle Obama's book, she calls that the swerve. That's a big, you tend to take your life in a different direction than what you're expecting. And so that's a pretty enormous swerve that you made, and especially as somebody in his 20s in the beginning of his career. So I'd love to hear how that process went.
Yeah, I was, I was 23 when I began to look into it, and really starting at 13 or 14, I dedicated my life to football. And so initially it started with Google Scholar searches. I knew the acronym CTE. I didn't understand what it stood for. So I was really starting at square one, looked what I could up online. One nice thing about being in the NFL is you have access. And so if you pick up the phone and call researchers, you can have a conversation with the people that are at the forefront of the research. And so it went, in a matter of months from, reading articles. Boston University, they have a brain bank there in conjunction with the VA that studies CTE. University of Michigan, UCLA, there's Johns Hopkins, there's many places that are doing this work. The field of CTE is really young. The first player diagnosed, the paper was written on him in 2005. His name is Mike Webster. He went to Wisconsin, actually, and my dad played in the same high school conference as Mike Webster. So this eerie similarity. But I looked into it more and more, reading on my own, ultimately connecting with the people doing the research. And I started, so deeply entrenched in that football world that, I thought these people were trying to make a name for themselves. I thought the science was being exaggerated. I think a little bit of willful ignorance and maybe even denial. The sheer amount of information, my personal relationship with some of the players that had their brains studied, and then also knowing the game really well. You mentioned it, intuition. I think the gulf between the science being conducted and what's transpiring on the field can be bridged with experience. And a lot of these researchers have never played college, let alone NFL football, and so they don't quite understand that beneath the data points, there's a lot going on. And when I'd ultimately go to conferences and speak with researchers, and they'd say something, or even describe to me what happened on a particular play, um, they, frankly, they were wrong. And it's intimidating at 23 to speak with whether it be a general in the army or a neuroscientist or a senator about these issues, because they didn't have the experience, and your title doesn't buy you what it's like to be on the field. So I had to acquire as much knowledge as I could, but then kind of blend that intellect with my intuition, what it was like to be on the field, my experience. And that's what allowed me to swerve. I think trusting myself. Nobody has all the answers. Even the smartest, most experienced neuroscientist in the world doesn't understand the intricacies of what's going on with something as complicated as brain injury. And so knowing that, understanding my own history and experience playing, and then really knowing quite a bit for a layperson about the neuroscience, I trusted my decision. And the worst case scenario is that I was protective of my brain. That's something I can live with. I couldn't live with the alternative of hitting my head too much.
Yeah, that's a great way of kind of level setting. The biggest risk that you have is that you're protecting your brain versus it's putting your career in contrast with that. Although I would say that it's still it's remarkable that you were able to do that, because I think a lot of people actually consciously choose to put their bodies at risk. Imagine football, especially because it's this long, this is your career, this is this goal that you've been working towards, and the idea of letting that go. I don't know if we kind of talk ourselves into like believing that it's not as bad as it's going to be, or being willing to take that risk, but for you to make that choice was pretty huge. And what a great point you make about having to talk to people who are these kind of known experts, but providing them with a much more on the ground, literally, perspective of what they're seeing and what they're trying to study, because that's a huge gift to the field, that you're able to actually help them to understand what they're only intellectualizing or thinking that they're observing, so that they can understand their data more. I mean, that's huge. That's a big deal.
Well, I wish they shared your opinion, but I do want to say, walking away is a luxury in a lot of ways. I played with guys who were the meal ticket for their families and even their communities. And, not everybody has the choice that I had. I was financially secure outside of football, didn't have a family, and come from a middle-class background. So I didn't have to play. There's plenty of guys that are privy to most of the information that I know, and even have experiences and injuries, but continue to play just because financial reasons. And so I respect that. I think it's all the more reason that these things need to be researched appropriately and made as safe as possible, because I don't think football is going away, at least at the professional level. And the makeup of who plays in the NFL is telling. Largely, I think 76% African American. Many players are from impoverished backgrounds, and so it's fairly stark and exploitative to have people with those that lack of choice on the field with not the best research or protective measures in place.
I really appreciate you making that point. That's a really important one for us to hold, is right. Who is it that's getting injured, and who has the opportunity to walk away versus who doesn't, especially given, the demographics of the players that are on the field. As you were saying that, it made me think about, I work in Oakland Unified, or I come from Oakland Unified, and our our football team has made the state championships. I think won the state championships 3 years in a row now. The demographics exactly match that, right? These are, the high school that's making these gains, and the kids that are showing such huge success are from, our lowest income neighborhoods in Oakland. I'd say 100% of the students are students of color, and they're getting a lot out of it, but it's also this demographic of students that, you're right, have a community that they're responsible to and need to take care of. And so their options are fewer, and that's something that we should pay attention to as well. Did you get any blowback from any of your peers or could be from your teammates, but also from, friends, family, when you made the choice to walk away?
A little. Mostly within the football world, there was understanding, even if there was disagreement. Players aren't quite as incredulous as onlookers and fans because they've been in collisions thousands of times. So even if they disagreed, they understood. Sure, I got a few offhand remarks from the more from Neanderthals, but so be it. I also, I wasn't a French player. I was a 3-time All-American, Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year, and led the 49ers in tackles as a rookie. So if someone were to call me soft or that I wasn't up for it, I mean, I guess I'm hard pressed to find another resume of an inside linebacker who produced as much in 5 years as I did at Wisconsin and with the 49ers. So sure, yeah, I got a lot of criticism. I think on social media, it's really easy to be tough, but players who understood what I was doing, wouldn't say those foolish things. And also, there's droves of former players. A third of living NFL alums are named in the lawsuit against the NFL. So, a slight of me is a slight of Junior Seau. It's a slight of Dave Duerson, Jim McMahon, and thousands of others. And so it's just, I never took it personally. I was just saddened by the ignorance sometimes when I did get that blowback.
Yeah, no, that's a great response to knowing that what your contribution is, but also just understanding that it's just a lack of awareness. I still want to hear about your research. Every time I keep skirting off from it, but there's one question I wanted to ask first, which is, and it brings me back to both the students at our high school that have been winning the state championships, but also one of my former superintendents, Tony Smith, who played for Cal, and I think he also played for the 49ers. But he talked a lot about how football saved his life and how, for him, he grew up without a lot of family stability. So his team became that stability and that force for him. Or again, if you imagine my students that I'm talking about from my school district that have been winning the state championships, while their bodies are on the line, they're also, for a lot of families, this is their ticket out. This is their opportunity. It's giving them a structure and a focus in a school that actually doesn't have that. So I think that the fact that the team is winning at this particular high school is noteworthy, because it's not our premier high school in the district. It's a school that's surrounded by a lot of violence. It's a school that has, a far way to go to be able to give kids the kind of academic preparation they need. And so I can see football as being this thing that's keeping our kids going and giving them that community. And so I guess I'm wondering what you would say to those families, or what your thoughts are around the impact of football that's not physical, but how do we hold both of those pieces together, I guess?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I get it often. I think we needn't deal in absolutes, and so it isn't as if a kid who quits pro football thinks football should be banned. Football was hugely informative and constructive for me when I began playing, and would hate for the next generation to lose out on some of those lessons. Also, I think it's inappropriate to compare high school to college and pro.
Right.
One thing that I think is promising is these diseases are believed to be dose response. So it's not about a single concussion or episode, but more think of it as erosion. It's the 10,000 small hits over time. And so what's promising about that is that we can retool youth football. I've supported a few pieces of legislation in Illinois, California, and New York, proposing to ban youth tackle until a certain age, 12 in a few instances, 14 in another. Pop Warner was never intended for children as young as 5. That's something that's new. these measures wouldn't be some soft hippie liberal progressives wanting to make our country weak. It'd actually be hearkening back to the ethos of Pop Warner. With that in mind, I think 95% of people that don pads don't play beyond high school. So if you don't begin to tackle until your freshman year and you play 3 or 4 years of high school football, I don't suspect that many kids would have significant accumulation of subconcussive hits to the degree that it would cause, you know, radical shifts later in life. I just don't think it's enough. I mean, there are folks who disagree. I don't think it's enough. Our brains are fairly resilient. So I think waiting to play until later, tackle, we'd glean all the lessons that Tony felt were important without incurring an extra few thousand hits to the brain. And then also in the same vein as reducing contact, NFL players only hit in practice 14 times over a 17-week season. Most injuries occur in practice. In high school, you can hit 3 times a week. So guys making $1 million a year hit their head less often than kids that are doing it as an extracurricular activity. So I think if we wait to play tackle until junior high or high school, we hit once a week and get rid of a lot of the hitting in 2-a-days and in the off season, we can still have the game that many people love. Kids in communities that where it's central to their development will still glean all the lessons they can from being on a team, from having father figures, to being a part of something bigger than themselves, having that responsibility without incurring so much injury. And then for 95% of people that ever play football, their experience would be markedly safer. It gets more complicated at the college level. I mentioned exploitation of pros. The NCAA is the definition of exploitation. Players don't even own their names. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and you're not allowed to make a penny. And there's no union. There's the same lack of protective measures for college athletes as there is for high school kids. So that's a whole nother can of worms, but I think waiting to tackle and then hitting less throughout high school would be a sensible solution. I see it as a silver lining. Jim Harbaugh was my coach with the 49ers, and he thinks every kid should wait until high school. And I think it's great for you athletically, actually, to develop a lot of other skills. Football, I joke, youth football is basically whoever hits puberty first runs around everybody or runs everybody over. So develop athleticism, get into good cardiovascular shape, and begin to play in high school if you'd like.
Wow, that's great. I appreciate you clarifying actually that it's simple measures that we can do to support our kids anyway, without taking away those things, the benefits too. Because I think you're right. People can go, black and white and without seeing the gradations. I'm curious how you got your fellow football players to participate in the survey and where you see it going now. So I'm hearing some of the outcomes of that survey, which is just understanding, number one, a big part of it is that it's a dose response. So it's the number of hits versus 1 or 2 traumatic ones, although that's what we as outsiders often see, the football player that's on the ground that's had the head injury. But how did you get some of your fellow players to take part in a mindfulness study? And where do you see it going from here?
It actually was surprisingly easy. Most of these guys I knew personally. And I just was candid with them about kind of the BS that was going on in the research of brain injury. I shared with them who Richie Davidson was, how he's one of the first people not to try to sell me anything or exaggerate the claims of what meditation can do. And then I told them that it had been beneficial to me with all the stress and leaving the game. I left in a unique way, but all players have a challenge in transitioning. It's really difficult to go. It sounds simple, but it's difficult to go from such a regimented life and such a unique life to kind of the more monotonous or methodical civilian life. And so these, the guys that participated, their ages ranged from 23 to 65. And to a certain degree, every man was still in transition. And so I framed it as a tool for that. I shared all of the wonderful things that meditation has been shown to help with. We didn't explicitly frame this as a brain injury research pilot study. So this was for well-being. Obviously, with 17 former NFL players, that's going to be something that's top of mind. I also think that a very simple aspect of it that players were drawn to, there was a certain amount of curiosity about what it is. There was trust in me as kind of an internal advocate in their world that swore that it helped him, but also just being a part of a team again. So we had weekly hour-and-a-half sessions, and then I made sure that the Center for Healthy Minds, where we ran the study, would provide a meal afterwards. And in a few ways, I think the meal was as restorative as the sessions. I mean, we would get in and for an hour or two, and sometimes we had to, kindly start to pack up the food and walk out the door while players were still talking. It's rare to have people who've had that same experience of being a pro football player. And you don't exactly bump into each other. There's 20,000 living NFL alumni. And so unless you have an opportunity, there's no one to share your experience with. And I think there's just so much value. Yes, meditation will calm your mind, help you sleep, help you deal with pain. What I loved about our study, and a reason I think guys jumped at the opportunity, was to be on a team of 17 again and share that experience. In terms of continuing, we have. So Richie Davidson has a nonprofit in conjunction with the University of Wisconsin called the Center for Healthy Minds. That's where we ran the pilot study. He also has, under that umbrella, something called Healthy Minds Innovations, which is designed to take what they've learned in the lab and immediately get it into society. And through Healthy Minds Innovations, we've continued to teach meditation to the entire University of Wisconsin athletic department. We've also introduced it to the University of Michigan's athletic department, West Point, and a few others that are lined up. So it's really promising. I think it's a natural thing for athletes to do. It'll help them on and off the field. And it's great to see. When we introduced it at Michigan, I asked by show of hands who'd been introduced to mindfulness or meditation, and about a third of the hands went up.
Wow.
And, there wouldn't have been a single hand in 2009, my freshman year at Wisconsin, maybe one or two. So really promising to see it seep into the athletic world. I think it'll help while you're playing, both as an athlete and as a person. But as I mentioned before, that transition piece, some are done at 40, some are done at 22, some are done at 18. Whenever your transition comes, I found that meditation kind of helped me steady the wings through that turbulence.
That's a really powerful, a few things that you said really stuck out to me. Number one, just being able to be in community with others that have a shared experience as you do. As an outsider, I think of NFL football players or as having this very exciting life where they get to have, I don't know, I guess I imagine you all like sitting in your mansion. Sounds much more interesting than, education. So just the idea that folks can still feel that isolation and that the needed support for transitioning into a non-athletic experience is a big one. That's a really powerful one. So just, the idea of community and the idea of mindfulness, not only just in helping your body, but also in helping you to make any transition that you're encountering in life more smooth. I would love to see mindfulness education go into be a part of teacher training programs, and that would hit high school coaches then too. And that, if the educators can also understand the benefits for them, how can they can also support their kids to start doing it at a younger age, I think would be really exciting. So I'm on to that one.
Well, we've been very purposeful about that approach. So every time we go into a team or an athletic department, we teach administrators and coaches first. So it's something that must be felt to be understood.
Absolutely.
And we could explain it all day, but for them to feel it and realize the benefits, that'll make more sense when their players begin to do it. And so that's the exact approach we've taken, and it's been successful.
That's good to hear. Yeah, it's absolutely, mindfulness is one of those things that you need to have an embodied experience of the benefits so that you can see why it's important to keep it going. Otherwise, it's just it's an intellectual exercise and therefore easy to kind of blow off. Mm-hmm. What are you up to next? So where can people keep an eye on you and your progress?
Well, I'm finishing my Silly certification. I'm also working on a project with the Players Tribune. It's a media outlet that Derek Jeter, former baseball player, started, surrounding some of what we've talked about today. There'll be a podcast, a website, a video series. It's a pretty robust project that should be out late spring, early summer, but just kind of a convening of the best and brightest and impassioned people that care about brain injury and other issues surrounding sports. And we're going to get athletes to lead the discussion on this because, as I said before, unless you've done it, it's hard to really know what's going on. So it's untitled right now, but it's taking up a lot of my time, and it's really fun. I'll share more when it comes out. In terms of following me, I'm very boring. I have social media. I never post. If you'd like to follow me, Chris Borland _. Be sure to include the underscore. That's on Twitter because there's this poor software engineer that's for 4 years now has been called a quitter and a wussy, and he's just trying to live his life with his family in Virginia. He gets pooped on.
That's funny. There's a couple Megan Sweets out there in the world, and I actually met one of them once, and it's a weird thing when you encounter someone with your same name and the implications of it.
It's funny, and I'll sometimes just look at his profile, and there'll be people that are like criticizing him, particularly 4 years ago when I quit. He would be he'd be getting ripped on, and he's a great guy. He's just, in Virginia, being a software engineer. He's got his family. He's like, hey, stop picking on me.
That's great. I love it. Well, Chris, thank you so much for your time today. I'll definitely be looking for you in the news and the media too. I'm so grateful that you're advocating for all athletes, but especially for kids, and that their experience can be one that's still really beneficial and life shaping without it being life changing because of the injuries that could come with it. So that's an amazing gift to the world that you're giving. So thank you.
I really appreciate your kind words. Thanks for all you do. And thank you for being so accommodating. We were supposed to do this interview last week, and after an overnight drive and some challenges picking up my car, we didn't. And so thanks for making this work. I was really happy to be on, and look forward to seeing you in person soon.
Yes, definitely. Thanks so much, Chris.
Thanks, Meg.
If you're ready to engage in transformational teaching and education reform that starts from the inside out, I encourage you to buy my book on Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com, the links to which are in the description of this episode. You'll walk away after reading this book with greater self-awareness that will improve the classroom landscape around you, have improved self-appreciation that will fuel empathy in the classroom and in the workplace, clarity about the origin and influence of your beliefs, and better decision-making skills developed through a contemplative approach. You can also stop by our website at www.your3eyes.com or follow us on Twitter and Instagram under the handle Your3Eyes. Thanks for joining us today.